If I could turn back time, bow, bow, then I would get trapped in a little statue thing. Hello interwebs, I hope you are all doing well because I'm here to review the third episode. Don't know where that accent was coming from, but the third episode of the Moon Knight series, The Friendly Type. Staying spoiler free up front before we get into spoilers in the back, I liked this episode a lot. I think there was a lot of really strong storytelling here. Oscar Isaacs continues to be amazing, and I like the way that this episode really drew out more of the relationship between Mark and Steven and how they were sort of having a little bit of interplay, as well as also characterizing Mark, who we haven't really gotten a ton of up until this point. And so I really enjoyed the sort of back and forth between those two characters and getting to know Mark more, as well as getting to know Mark's relationship with Layla, who we got to see interact with Steven last episode, but not really a ton or really at all with Mark. So getting to see that relationship develop further was really nice. And the other thing too is I really am enjoying just the vibe of this movie. We don't really get a lot of like adventure type, like archaeologist treasure hunting kind of adventure movies anymore. I think like Uncharted was one that we got recently, and Uncharted was a decent movie. I enjoyed it, but I haven't really felt like we've gotten something on the level of like The Mummy or National Treasure in quite a while. And so like just the fun of like the hopping around and getting to try and investigate and being in these sort of like trying to treasure hunt and find things sort of environments is really cool. Though I do kind of like the subversion here that the villain of this movie is the white guy. Typically in like movies like Uncharted or even The Mummy, things like that, is about white people coming into other countries to like grab treasure or save treasure, like even Indiana Jones is that. So here we actually have people that are at least from this background trying to save treasure instead of Ethan Hawke's character being this sort of hero character. So I actually kind of like that subversion within this. Though I'm sure people of Egyptian background could speak to more nuance within that depiction, I thought that was actually a really cool thing to notice and to point out within how this show is depicting that. The one thing, though, that I found to be kind of a negative within this episode, though, was the sort of broadening out of the mythology. We got to learn a little bit more about sort of the grander world that this sits within in the MCU. And a lot of it, and I don't know which came first within the comics, but just watching this as an MCU fan, a lot of it seemed cribbed from other recent MCU projects. Namely, the Eternals had a similar, like, we don't interfere in things vibe. And also the gods that we meet here in this episode kind of seem like idiots to a degree. Like, I get, like, bureaucracy is sort of like, oh, they're not always going to do things well. We had a similar thing in Loki as well, where we have this bureaucratic system kind of failing people. But here it just kind of seems like a lazy version of that. So it was kind of mixing and matching from projects that we just had very recently within the MCU and not doing them particularly well. So I was kind of a little bit disappointed in how the broader mythology was playing out in this episode. So that's my major negative with this one. But overall, I am very positive on the continuing development of this show, and I'm very much digging the vibe of it overall. But that is my spoiler-free thoughts, so let's get into the spoilers. It's the spoiler time. I don't know why I'm singing, but deal with it. Sorry you're dealing with me, folks. I'm tired. I just got back from Mission Chicago yesterday, so I'm still, like, dealing with a little bit of jet lag. So this is the Jessie you're getting for this review. Anyways, getting to the episode, I love the opening scene with Layla and her mother, because it kind of instantly showcased Layla's used to this. Like, she and her mother have been doing this for years. They got this. They can make fake passports, get her in. It's a common thing, but it just showed us that instead of telling us that. And also gave us a little bit of Layla's backstory as well, and like her feelings about her father and her sort of wanting to live up to him and sort of carrying the baggage of his death. And I thought that that was sort of a nice way to get us a little bit more into Layla. And then we have Harrow having found where Amma is buried, so we got like a ticking time clock going on set up in the episode. But then that brings me to probably my favorite sequence of the episode, where Mark is sort of going after these guys to try and learn where this dig site that Harrow has is. And the fight sequence where he's beating up these guys was very well filmed. I'm really liking how the MCU has put a lot more effort into their fight sequences in the past, like, few projects, going back to Shang-Chi, where they're filmed from a distance and they're kind of just a few takes instead of a lot of very cutty things that you'd see in earlier MCU projects like the Winter Soldier, where they cut like every few minutes. So I kind of like the wide focus on the choreography, and that's very much appreciated. But again, I'm liking that they're taking this and then doing like weird jumps with it. But now we're seeing things from Mark's perspective instead of Steven's. And so the funny little bit where like Mark's like suddenly in like a taxi and he's like, wait, where? And then they goes after the guys again and they're just like, you just let us go. And I thought that was really wonderful. And seeing Steven like not wanting to be involved in any of this violence, I thought was particularly interesting. And then we got a little hint with Mark jumping ahead, and all the guys that he was chasing after are now dead, and even Steven does not know who did that. So we get an idea of a third personality here, like maybe a hint of someone even more violent than Steven and Mark. But I find it kind of interesting that Mark doesn't question it further. I think he says maybe he thinks it's Steven, but I don't really think you would believe that. So kind of interesting that Mark and Steven ignore that. And maybe that's part of how this works, that they are sort of like willfully ignoring it without consciously ignoring it. But it was an interesting thing to note. I also like that we get to see that Khonshu is very bloodlusty. Like he said, bring the guy to the edge, and that guy just killed himself. Khonshu was very unconcerned that that guy died. He's like, oh, I thought he was going to talk. So I liked showing the sort of uncaringness of Khonshu. And yet that gets a little bit subverted later on, because Khonshu even states when he's brought before the gods, which is a scene that came up next, that he's the only one that still cares about humanity, that all the rest of the gods sort of have backed away from even caring about humanity anymore. So I like that even Khonshu, who is this apparently uncaring, cold, callous dude, is the most caring of the gods, which kind of tells you how shitty the whole situation is, which I particularly liked that interesting way to showcase this. But getting into the gods here, I really liked the way that their whole thing was depicted, like, oh, that they have avatars that just get taken over for a few minutes, and Mark just sort of like, and all the other avatars just sort of sit and let it happen, as opposed to while the actual gods sort of take over their bodies. But again, as I mentioned in the spoiler-free section, I didn't really like that they were like, oh yeah, we don't take part in anything. It felt, again, very Eternals-y, and I didn't really particularly, it just was kind of telling us that. It didn't really do anything for me. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I wasn't super into it. And also they kind of looked like chumps because they brought in Harrow, and I liked Harrow being able to convince them that he was totally fine and that it was actually Khonshu that was the problem, and using Mark's mental health as the thing to rest that upon. I thought was really good, and is how people like would do that they would use someone's mental health issues to sort of to discredit them. Like people do that all the time, despite the fact that people with mental health issues still are people and still can have thoughts, and someone's mental health issues may not even be relevant in a situation but will still get brought up. And I thought that was well depicted, but I just thought the gods were like kind of chumps, just taking Hera on his word, like you're not going to investigate at all. Like there's a lot on the line here. Apparently Ahmed is a big thing you don't want released. You're not even going to like check into it like a little bit. So I thought that was rather frustrating, to be kind of honest. They looked like complete and utter idiots. But then they're sort of sent off to look for this sarcophagus, which may have a way to find Amit's tomb. And then we get Layla again, who meets up with Mark. And I liked the scenes that we got between Mark and Layla, because it started to showcase that they did have caring for each other. That Mark was an affectionate guy to a degree and does care for her, but you also see that he is distant and that he doesn't open up with her, that he does lie to her, that he does gaslight her, as we see later on in the episode when confronted with Harrow's words. And so I appreciated that well-developed depiction of the relationship just pretty quickly. I thought that was handled very well. And it makes sense when Layla sees Steven later on that she would be drawn to him, because he is a much more open, affable, kind, caring guy when he sort of takes over and is able to decipher the sarcophagus. I thought that was very nice. But then they go and see this guy named Anton, and I was a little bit, again, maybe I'm a little bit tired, so that's probably the case, but I was a little bit confused by, like, what his deal was with her. Like, they have some history going on between Anton and Layla, and sort of being upset at each other and not really want him to touch the sarcophagus and things like that. And then Harrow comes in and does his convincing thing again and shows off his power, so I'm sure Anton's going to be joining Harrow and being an antagonist for some parts of the future. It was just very weird and quick, and I wasn't sure, I didn't really really pick up on the exact relationship and his part in all of this, particularly. Again, maybe I'm just tired because it's been a busy past few days, but I was a bit like lost on that. But that being said, I did like that Mark had to let Steven help him, and I like the argument with the mirror. The mirror work in this whole episode was fantastic as well, and so I like that Steven has to actually help him, that he does have useful knowledge here because he's sort of aware of all this mythology. But then I enjoyed even more the fight sequence after that. But again, I'm sort of like, why didn't you bring out the suit sooner, as Khonshu was saying, and just kill Harrow? I feel like that'd be the easiest solution. Just like turn on the suit and snap Harrow's neck. That felt like it would have been the easy thing to do. So I'm unsure why that didn't happen. But the fight sequence was rather well done. I do like that they switched suits right in the middle of it. And Steven's like, all right, everyone stop down. Let's just calm the F down. And then just gets stabbed a bunch. He's like, all right, take the body, take the body. I thought that was great. But one thing I was particularly frustrated on was Layla clearly can hold her own in a fight. I loved that. I love seeing her kick butt against the one dude. But then there's a moment where it looks like she's going to be the one to save Mark, who's almost defeated on the ground. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. I like that she gets a moment to actually go and save him. I like women being treated as equals in a fight, even though women in the MCU don't get to be, you know, the big bad superhero in the suit all as much as the men do. But I did at least appreciate, oh, there's a little bit of equality here. But then Mark ends up being the one that saves her because she gets taken down. And so I thought that was a bit disappointing. I would have much rather Layla have been the one to save him in the moment. Because then we have to have another damsel in distress, and then it's just the boy being like, oh, she's in danger. I'm going to break apart and go rescue her. I'm going to find the strength in this moment to save the girl. It's like, I've seen this trope, and I wish it wasn't reliant on a helpless girl. But then this brings us to the final part where I've already talked about the stuff between Layla, Steven, and Mark already here. But then I liked that Steven got to be useful. But then even on top of that, Khonshu got to be useful as well and help turn back the sky, which was a very cool visual. But that also got him trapped by the gods because he kept interfering. And I thought that was a nice price to pay for being able to figure out where Amit's tomb was. That was just a very cool sequence. And I like that it involved Steven and Khonshu having to work together to be able to figure this out. That it wasn't on Mark. So now Khonshu's starting to see the value of Steven within this. I thought that was a particularly nice way to start to get all these different people and within Mark to work together. I thought that was just very, very cool and interesting, and a nice stakes raiser to end this episode on, with Harrow going and confronting Khonshu and sort of saying, this is your fault. A great, great little moment throughout all of that. So great cliffhanger to end the episode on. So overall, like I said, some problems with some of the mythology building and the background of this episode, but overall another strong entry into this series so far. I'm deeply enjoying it, and I hope you are too, but I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Let me tell me what you think about Moon Knight. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching this. Also, I should note, I did a sort of retrospective on my weekend that I had at Mission Chicago this past weekend. Honestly, it was one of the best weekends of my life. I am honestly I'm riding on cloud 9, despite how tired I am, with how amazing this past weekend was. So that video should be going up in just later today. So if it's not up by the time that you see it, just wait a little bit and it'll be up very, very soon. And I'm really proud of that video, and I have so many things to share, including some cool Star Trek stuff. But beyond all of that, just thank you so much for watching, all of you, and I hope that you, as always, my friends, live long and prosper.